Maybe you could turn it sideways? Well, I don't know.
Think
if you can see the questions.
Yeah. Let me put it more on you because you're the cool one. Starting live video.
A little too bright behind me. Let's get that way just slightly.
So I think it's live. I don't know. Hey, you guys. We're gonna give it a couple minutes to let people get on. If you want to send out a couple text reminders. But we'll get going at like 9:05. This is Katie and Ben.
Everybody.
And we're super excited to kind of keep the hype about What the Health alive. There's a lot of really good conversations that are going on right now about plant-based diet. I've had a lot of my friends asking me questions about it, and Ben's actually the one that got me sort of interested in sort of going vegan and exploring the world of vegetarianism. Due to poor wireless connection, your video has been paused.
Yeah.
Alright, let me just get off the internet then. If we're gonna be playing those games. Technology.
Oh man, I hope people can find it.
I'm pretty sure I just took a picture. What's up, Mar?
Oh.
Just here. Oh. All right, we're back. Obviously, we couldn't have a night without any technical difficulties. So just a new stream. If you were on the last one, hop on this one. We're going to give it till 9:05 and let everybody just get on real quick. But we are, like I was just saying, keeping the conversation alive about What the Health and talking about plant-based diet and how you can incorporate some new strategies for being healthy into the way that you're eating and into your lifestyle. Joining me tonight is one of my very good childhood friends who just happens to be a world-traveled agriculturalist who is teaching people how to, change their lives and garden, and he knows all kinds of things I don't even know, so he's going to explain that later. But make sure you're sending texts. Go ahead and tag your friends. If you've had a conversation about What the Health movie with somebody in the last couple weeks, tag them because we know this is going to be really beneficial and informative. So like I said, we're just going to give it a couple minutes for people to get on. We're also live streaming on YouTube. So if you know someone that couldn't get on, we'll have a link for you after the fact to send to them. You want to say anything?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. So it looks like we'll be able to see any questions that people have as we go along, and we'll do our best to try to get to as many of those as possible. Just to give a little background on myself, I have been eating a largely plant-based diet for approximately a decade now. I have a 9-year-old daughter who has only lived on a plant-based diet. And basically my work is centered around how can we improve people's health and the health of the environment simultaneously. What the Health was largely about what we eat and how it affects our health. And that's a huge component of what I do, but I also focus on what it is that we grow and what that does to the environment. So you can ask questions from either of those lenses if you're interested.
Awesome. Hey, Drea, I see you guys. What's up, Yiza? Thanks for getting on. Sydney, I'm glad you made it. I was hoping you would remember because I forgot to tag you. We're letting everybody get on. Thank you so much. Hey, Rhiannon. What's up, Karen? We're so excited to have you. We're just going to give it, I guess, probably one more minute, and then we'll really jump into tonight's content. But like I said earlier, go ahead and tag or share the link. Get anybody on that you think might benefit from this. If you know someone with a health issue, and maybe someone who hasn't seen What the Health, and you think maybe this is information that would benefit them, we would love to have them on. So we're about to get going. Who else is here? Hi, Donna. Hey, Nicole. Thank you guys for hopping on. About to get going here in just a second. What's up, Sydney? So we're going to get together for some hiking. Hey, Darnell. What's up, boo? I think you've met Darnell before. Yeah, I'm sure, at a party or something. You've probably met a lot of these people. So if you missed it earlier, I actually grew up with Ben. I'm currently living in my grandmother's old house, and he grew up right next
Just
door.
next door, yeah.
His grandparents live next door, so we grew up together, and so that's how I know him. If you're wondering why I have such cool friends, it's just by chance. But so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. And I just wanted to just start off with introduction. So Ben just talked a little bit about, what he knows so that you're prepared to ask questions. But the reason that I was really interested in doing this is Ben's the one who introduced me to all of this information like 5 or 6 years ago. Right after I had Enzo, he had just recently sort of dived into this lifestyle and learned some things that changed his life. And he brought that into our friend circle. He started showing up to parties with, sweet potato rolls instead of beer, and cauliflower pizza and all that stuff. And he just created this hype in our circle of friends. And I was pregnant with Enzo, and he told me about a movie called Forks Over Knives, and he said, you have to see this. And all of my friends had seen it. My brother actually burned it on a DVD for me and was like, you have to watch this movie. It's life-changing. So he's the one that brought that into my life, and Forks Over Knives, I would say, is very similar to What the Health, sort of a similar theme, a little bit different information presented, but, it's around plant-based diet and the health benefits that go along with that. So I spent my entire maternity leave with Enzo watching every food documentary there was. I watched that. I watched Food Inc. I mean, like literally anything that was out on Netflix at the time. I bought books. And as my family knows, over the next year, I was demanding at every, family function, GMO-free, organic, vegan. I changed everything about the way that I was eating because of this information. I was shocked. I was disgusted. I was woke because I didn't know that these things were even issues before. Like Ben said, the environmental issues, the societal issues that come along with this, and the economics that go into it, and then the health aspect. So I did that, but I slowly, because of money, because of time, because it's inconvenient, sort of went back to the old ways. And so now I am eating meat again, and I don't do a whole lot of dairy, but I didn't stick to that lifestyle. And so when this movie came out and I saw all this hype, a lot of you know that I'm working with TLC, and what I like about TLC is that it addresses root cause health issues. But what we're talking about tonight is how to prevent them and how to reverse them. So if you're not going to buy the tea, you can actually just live really healthy and get the same effects. Like I said, I invited Ben here tonight to talk about it. He's going to tell you now a little bit about his background and what he does for a living. But he's really the expert tonight, and I'm really looking forward to you all answering questions and us just having a, brief discussion about health and food. So Ben, tell us who you are.
Yeah, Katie, thank you so much. So I just want to share a little bit about my experience, how I actually came into the work that I do, which is largely around creating agricultural systems and relocalizing food in a way that benefits the environment and the people. So right now, one of the things that I think What the Health really hit on, at least the nerve that seems to have gotten so many people interested in seeing it, is just the frustration with how the system works. Like, what dictates the food that's in the community in which I live? And that frustration was really the genesis of me wanting to get deeper into this. So like Katie said, I travel around the world now. I have an NGO called Can You Love, or a nonprofit called Can You Love, and I currently work at Forested, which is a 10-acre food forest, a research food forest, which I'll explain a little bit later, in Bowie, Maryland. So when I realized that right now on Earth, there's a couple really amazing trends, and you can look at them multiple ways. One is that there are currently more people on Earth dying of too much food than there are people dying of too little food. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary thing to be able to say. And the agricultural systems that we've put in place that make that the case I believe were largely put in place because people were trying to feed the world. I do believe that that's the case. And it's important to recognize that the calories that I'm using to speak to you right now came from agricultural systems that are largely doing environmental harm. So, I probably wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for monocultures. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for the pesticides that people have created to deal with the monocultures that we have in agricultural systems. So in recognizing that, I think it's really important to say that now that we are 7.4 billion people, the systems that we created back when we were about 1 billion people or less are no longer applicable. You can look around the world and see that many of the biggest agricultural companies in the world say we need to double our agricultural output in order to feed a world of 9 billion people. Well, if that were true, then we right now, the most conservative estimates have us producing enough food for 11.5 billion people. Now, there's enough food for 11.5 billion people, yet we're only 7.4 billion people. Why is it that over 1.5 billion people are starving or don't know where their next meal is going to come from? So that's where the global food industry, that what the health is talking about, really makes the biggest difference. So when we're talking about our own health, if we were producing chickens in our own community, if we were producing pigs, cows, dairy in our own community, we would have a radically different idea about how to produce it if we were producing it for our families, right? We would want all of those things to actually be improving our health. But the way that it's being produced in the globalized system is based on how many units, how many pounds of flesh that they can produce in the smallest amount of space possible for the highest profit possible. And when you recognize that, you really see that pigs, cows, these are animals that are supposed to live over a decade. And we're harvesting them, we're killing them when they are 6 months old. So we are making them grow far more rapidly than they ever would naturally grow in the wild, right? Perhaps I should back up. When we think about why it is that human beings started eating meat in the first place, or eating animal products in the first place, it was because animals had the ability to eat things in the environment that we couldn't eat. So, for example, cattle and their ancestors, they could eat grass. We can't eat grass. They can, we look at the egg industry or the chicken industry, and they're eating 100% corn and soy diets. In fact, you can spend extra money on your eggs if it says all vegetarian feed. Chickens aren't vegetarians. Chickens eat diets consisting of 95% more percent of insects. So we have to start recognizing that the food that's being fed to us are being fed using very different incentives than the health of the consumer that's actually buying them. So once I started understanding that and recognizing that right now 2/3 to 3/4 of all agricultural land on the entire planet is currently being dedicated to animal agriculture, that's when I started realizing that this is the number one cause of land degradation and environmental degradation around the world. So if you think about the Amazon rainforest, for those of you that are into the truth and learning the reality of what we're facing, one of the things that I would really recommend to you is Google Earth time-lapse. So Google Earth, we've all used it. We've used, Google Maps, and we've seen the satellite imagery that we now have of pretty much every spot of Earth. Well, those satellites that we use for Google Earth have been up there. The first one was launched in 1972. Now we have a time lapse of every spot of Earth. So for the first time in human history, we can see multi-generational collateral effects of the kind of decisions that we've been making over time. So Google Earth Time Lapse, it's an open source. Anybody can go into it and you can look up any place on Earth. In fact, NASA has pre-selected at the very bottom of the map some places that they recommend you go to see some really dramatic change that's happened over time. And one of those is probably the most poignant thing, which is the Amazon rainforest, and the Amazon rainforest being cut down. Now, I thought, oh, we're cutting down the Amazon rainforest to make paper or lumber, or you go down the list of different things that we could be cutting down the Amazon rainforest for. Well, it turns out that the vast majority of the deforestation that's happening in the Amazon is to turn one of the most fertile and important ecosystems on Earth into meat. So that's having, cattle production and the corn and soy to fatten that cattle as rapidly as possible. So recognizing how these things are married, everything that we are doing agriculturally and seeing the collateral effects on the earth, you could see a direct parallel to that same agriculture and what it's doing to our bodies. And those two parallels are really the genesis behind the change that I made and also the work that I currently do.
Very nice. I told you he was smart. So basically what he's saying is that the animals that we're eating are not eating the things that they used to. So they're not giving us the nutrients that they used to, which means they're not benefiting us anymore. And if you saw What the Health, you know that all the nutrients that we don't need to get them from animals. We can get them from plants and vegetables. This week I've been sharing a lot of different recipes and meal tips about where to get protein, because everybody talks about protein, and that was one of the funny things that I thought about What the Health in the movie, was because they brought that up, because everybody does it. I remember, my family, well, where are you going to get your protein? And I was like, I'll find it, relax. But it's actually everywhere, and you can get a lot of it, and we don't need as much of it. As they tell you, I think for men it's like 56 grams per day recommended for a sedentary man. And you can get that throughout the day in grains and seeds and beans. It's very easy. But it's also in lots of different foods. Do you have any favorites, because you're sort of more experienced in this diet?
Mushrooms are a go-to for me.
Yeah, tell us some of your favorite protein sources or, nutrient-rich foods that you're actually eating on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, for me, so I'm not a bodybuilder, but I work in a forest where I have to move logs. I have to move very heavy things on a regular basis. But for me, the most important aspect, and I think for the modern human, the most important aspect is not that you can lift 450 pounds, which you can do eating a plant-based diet, but that's not the most important thing we can be doing. It's actually our endurance. And anybody that knows me, has played sports with me, or has worked with me, knows that I can keep going and going and going. When you look at one of the things they point out in What the Health, our digestive tract, our digestion takes so much of our energy, especially if you're trying to break down animal proteins from meat. Mm-hmm. So comparatively, the amount of energy that it takes for me to digest the protein from my mushrooms, my legumes, broccoli, of course, contains protein, so does spinach. Every single plant that you are consuming, or fruit that you are consuming, is going to have protein in it. Now, it's only going to be trace amounts, but I think one of the keys to remember is that even if broccoli has way less protein than that of, say, a steak or a piece of jerky, the amount of digestible protein from that broccoli is far easier for your body to absorb than it is from those other sources. So if you're just looking, and a lot of the science has just looked at a steak and just studied what is the raw protein content within that steak, without looking at how much of it is actually digested and utilized by the body of the person that consumes it. So I think that's a really important fact. And I just want to make a couple quick points here. So Yes, I am a vegan, and I find it very difficult to be a vegan. It's an extremely difficult thing. There's a lot of nuances that I'll talk about in a little bit, but I want to just say that as a vegan, I am not actually an advocate of veganism because I know how hard it is. Now, if you have health problems, there is nothing better that you can do than to start working on a plant-based diet and working back from some of the things, the collateral damage that you've caused in your own system. But in the long haul, understanding how difficult it is to be a vegan, I want to point out that I am more a proponent of knowing where your food comes from. And when you know where your food comes from and you start seeing some of these agricultural practices, like the factory farms that they showed, and you see these pigs that are put in the gestation crates and they can't even turn around. If you actually wanted to get pork from a sustainable operation, you wouldn't be able to afford the amount of pork that would put you in the hospital. It costs a lot of money to produce this stuff. And the way that they produce it so cheaply is to produce this rapidly and massively subsidized process that gets that pig from birth to as fat and as heavy as possible, as rapidly as possible, to get it on your shelves so you can buy it on a cheap per pound basis. Or you can go to that McDonald's and get it off the dollar menu. So there's no reason why at a McDonald's you can buy a burger with strips of bacon on it, with cheese on it, cheaper than you can a salad in the same establishment. If you look at, when you talk about just the sheer impact that the animal agriculture industry is having on the world, the reason why I said that we're producing enough food for 11.5 billion people, and that's the most conservative estimates, 11.5 billion people, is because they count 1 pound of meat as 1 pound of food. But because animals are no longer eating from the environment, grass, bugs, and the other things that they would consume in their natural diet, instead what we've done is we have animals that are actually eating food that could be for human consumption. So when you think about a pound of meat, it takes many pounds of food that they consume in order to create that 1 pound of meat. Even worse than that, when we're looking at the water crisis that we're facing around the world, 1 in 10 major rivers no longer reaching their end. The 4th largest lake in the world dried up in 2007, and that's one you can see on Google Earth time lapse. It's called the Aral Sea. I highly recommend it. Now, when we look at the agricultural practices that we're using, we have to recognize that it takes thousands of gallons to produce 1 pound of meat. So, this really drives home that environmental aspect. If we're, having 10,000 cattle on 10 acres of land in Texas, where we're growing so much of our beef, or in the Amazon, or in any of these places where we're producing this, we're using so much water to feed to give these animals what they need in such densely populated areas that if we use that same water to produce things that are plants that we can consume, we could easily be producing enough food for 25 billion people right now. So I think that's a really important factor to remember. So when you are buying meat, because I think a lot of people are going to continue to want to consume meat, we have to recognize, do we want food that was grown strictly for profit, or do we want food that if it was allowed to live, if a cow was allowed to live for more than 6 months, would it be able to live out its full life? Or if it lived for 1 year or 1.5 years, would it have a number of tumors on it? Would it start not being able to hold up its own weight and collapse? Would it die from liver failure, kidney failure, and all of these things? Well, the reality is that none of these animals would be able to live their full lifespan because of the way that we're growing them. And guess what happens when we consume them? The exact same things. It's not rocket scientists. It's not rocket science. If an animal is going to be a diseased animal and we are consuming a diseased animal, what happens to our health? That's a very simple question to ask, and one that's pretty easy to answer.
Yeah. So we have questions coming in. I'm noticing. Thank you, Yiza, for sending in your question. I really want to make sure if you have anything specific you want to ask Ben, just type it in because we're seeing those. So Yiza is curious about fish. So we've talked a lot about meat, and a lot of people have this question because we sort of separate, red meat, white meat, and fish into 3 completely different categories. Yeah. And a lot of people assume that fish is the healthiest. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, there's a number of issues with fish. Again, there is a way to get fish that have much less of the toxins, are much less detrimental to the environment. So farming fish is one of the ways that people say, oh, well, this is much better for the environment. We're not sending out these giant trawl nets where we're capturing 25 million fish in a singular catch, mm-hmm. and wiping an area clean of a certain kind of fish. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that, and they hit on this in What the Health, that farm-raised fish are often so densely packed because you have to, any kind of agriculture today, the pressure is you have to make profit, and the only way you can make profit is if you have a product that is comparable in price to the groups that are setting the trend, right. the price trend, mm-hmm. which are the biggest producers, mm-hmm. right? So if you have the biggest fish companies in the world going out and catching 25 million fish, and you have a farm where you're trying to grow fish, mm-hmm. and you want to make profit, yes, maybe if you're trying to do it in the healthiest way possible, and you have a market that's willing to pay 2 or 3 or 4 times as much for their fish, then maybe you're going to do it the right way. Mm-hmm. But most people don't have access to those kind of markets. Mm-hmm. So what they have to do is they have to cut corners. They have to put as many fish as possible into as small an area as mm-hmm. possible, buy the cheapest food possible. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you do that is you get diseased fish. So they have to give them antibiotics and the same exact problems that you face in factory farms on land with pigs and chickens and with cows. Yeah. So there's a few organizations out there that I think are doing it right, but you still need to limit the amount that you consume of these kind of things. So, for example, there's a really great documentary. It's only 30 minutes long. It was put out there by Patagonia, the clothing company, and it's I'm forgetting the name of it right now. I will put it in the comment section of this afterwards. But basically, they show a sustainable salmon harvest where they're harvesting salmon the same way it was being harvested wild by the Native Americans. And what that means is that they're harvesting only the healthiest fish, and that they are also not catching byproducts. So one of the biggest problems that we face in the fishing industry, when they're catching fish in mass, they catch thousands and thousands of pounds of fish that they didn't intend to catch that die in this process, and then they just throw it back. So they're catching it in a way where they're not killing tons and tons of other fish that they didn't intend to, and they're selecting fish that they know are part of a healthy, thriving ecosystem. So When you buy that fish, guess what? You're going to have to pay a lot more money for it. And again, because you have to pay a lot more money for it, you're probably going to eat less of it as well. So hopefully that answered your question, and please ask a follow-up if you didn't feel that answered every part of your question.
Definitely. So we have more questions coming in, but I think just a sort of summary of what you just talked about that I'm taking away, and that was sort of a point in the movie, is that we don't need meat. We've become accustomed to eating meat. You don't need fish. You don't need chicken. You don't need beef. You can get all of the vitamins, the nutrients, the protein, everything that you could potentially get from a healthy animal, you can get from a plant-based diet. So you don't need it. But Ben has already stated, it's hard to be a vegan in the way that we live, the foods that are available to us in all communities, not just low economic communities, but everywhere. It's readily accessible. It can be at times more expensive to source, healthy animal foods. And so that's not feasible for everyone. But if you're looking to address your health issues and you're interested in becoming the healthiest version of you, a plant-based diet is your best move. And what he's saying about the fish is fish aren't bad, cows aren't bad, chickens aren't bad. I mean, those are things that could be good for us, but the way that they exist in the world today, the way that they're being created, the farming, the antibiotics, the things with the chickens, some of the movies, if you guys haven't seen Food Inc., that one, if you're not grossed out enough yet, go watch Food Inc. But when you see really how this stuff, it's not only heartbreaking, it's disgusting. And I've noticed a lot of people, I just watched What the Health this morning actually, but I noticed a lot of people kept saying, I don't want to drink pus. And I was like, dag, this movie must be really nasty because everyone's talking about the pus. And when I watched What the Health, I was honestly surprised that it got everybody's attention because it wasn't that, the gross factor wasn't there. They didn't really put in a lot of the stuff that, really resonates with you and makes you just not even want to eat this stuff. And the farming that Ben's talking about, when you understand and when you see what really goes on and when you see the creatures that are being created now and these poor things that, like he said, are not even living 6 months, and that's the food you're eating. I mean, we in our minds are visualizing a farm, we're thinking of a beautiful farm and these awesome chickens we get to eat and it's great, but it's really, that's not the situation.
And that's a great point. And you know why we have that image? It's because the companies that sell it give us that image.
Yeah.
So Cloverland Farms, Cloverland Milk, which has the monopoly on school milk. Mm. If you look at their trucks when you're driving down the road, you will see a single happy cow on the back of the truck and a giant green field which makes up the entire side of both sides of the truck with one little barn.
Yep.
So that couldn't be farther from the reality of what that actually is. So they want you to have this image of the healthy, happy cow, the happy chickens, and the reality could not be further from that image that they're trying to draw.
Yeah.
So don't blame yourself for thinking that that's how these animals are being grown or being treated, because it's a conscious effort to try to depict that for the consumers.
Yeah, well, it's marketing.
Right.
So I'm kind of peering over. Ben and I were chit-chatting before we got on, and we were just taking notes and figuring out exactly what we wanted to hit on. And one of the things that I was talking to him about was how I initially was this dedicated, super grossed out, vegan. I did it for almost a year, and I was trying to get my family into it. I made everybody this great organic, flaxseed cereal for Christmas one year. But then I fell off, and I told him, there's a very stark difference between the way Ben and I live our lives, and I made an observation that he, this was life-changing for him in a way that he quit a government job and followed this as a passion. He felt so strongly about the things that he learned that he changed not just his diet, but he engaged in a community, and he started to learn more and more and more. And now he's an expert. He's one of the people that's doing this for their life. I was a regular person, and I got excited about it, but I didn't change my job. I didn't really engage with any, vegan groups, or start reading vegetarian books. I bought some great cookbooks and I watched all the documentaries in a month, but then I didn't watch any more again. I stopped having conversations about it. It'll slowly leave your mind. And so it's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this, because I see so many people talking about it now, and I don't want you guys to lose that hype, because the health benefits that I noticed from making that change were immediate. Within 2 days, I remember my digestion being regulated. I talk about that a lot with the tea. The tea does that, but you can do that without buying tea, Like Ben is the only person that I know that I haven't tried to sell tea to, because I know he doesn't need it, because he's already, I haven't, I've told you about it, but I've never tried to get him to buy it because he doesn't need it. He already eats so clean, and he's already treating his body in such a way that he doesn't need these things. He's not having any of the problems that I see in my friends that I say, hey, you should drink this, because it's a shorter conversation than, hey, you need to stop eating animals and all these things. So but one of the other things, and going back to what I see on his notes, is don't beat yourself up. And I think that was really hard for me, not just with even veganism, but with any kind of diet and any kind of lifestyle change. Like, we get really gung-ho about it. Everyone that's on here tonight is obviously excited and interested. But you're going to go to a cookout and someone's going to have some banging chicken and you're going to eat it. And then what do? Are you off the wagon? Like, are you not doing good? And, I can't be a vegetarian because I had a chicken wing. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you've been able to stick with it. So what's some advice you have for people?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that frankly pissed me off the most about the industry is that everything points to you. It's your fault that you eat this unhealthy food. It's your fault that you fall off and don't stick to your diets. It's your fault. And that really, really struck a nerve with me, because when I started recognizing that these companies are actually trying, and you have to understand, like, the economic reality behind this, they're forced into this in some respect, but they are trying to make flavors and tastes that are the most addictive flavors that you can possibly have. Like me, I have been a vegan now for many years. Fully vegan for about 6 years and mostly plant-based for about 10 years. And every time I go past a Popeyes, do you know what happens in my mouth? I salivate. It is the best tasting thing I have ever put in my mouth. But the reality is that they created a recipe that is made to be as addictive as possible. Yeah. The salt content, the fat content, the sugar, all of those things are extraordinarily addictive. So for me, the only way that I could work past that was to look at the reality of that food. So understanding what it is that Popeyes is doing. It's killing hundreds and hundreds of people in my community. It's making profit off of people taking years off of their life. It's chickens that are living in the most horrible conditions in the world. And one of the things that the movie didn't hit on, they talked about the use of antibiotics. They talked about 80% of all antibiotics being used in the United States is being used for animal agriculture. But understanding the volume of antibiotics in agriculture, and now the superbugs that are being created because of how many antibiotics they use. So now when we get sick, we don't have antibiotics that can actually handle the infections that we have. So understanding like this fuller picture, and for me, and I'm not recommending that everybody do this by any stretch of the imagination, because it was a really rough period in my life, but it took me weeks of watching on YouTube factory farm videos to have a instantaneous counter response in my brain when my salivatory glands start reacting to the smell of Popeyes that they're pumping out of the roof of the building, Yeah. So that's what it took for me. And a lot of people, they're like, I don't want to see it, I don't want to know about it, and I understand that. But the question for me really became about looking at my daughter and recognizing that the decisions of what I eat are not just my own decisions. I am making the decision for my daughter about how long I'm going to live, right? Like, how many people do I have in my life that are going to have their lives cut short? And not just cut short, meaning they're going to die one day, because, we're all going to die one day, but also the health implications, the misery that goes along with having that heart attack, right, with having that stroke, with having cancer, the misery that you have to see your loved ones go through. I didn't want to do that for my daughter. And the reality is that for me personally, I was never going to make this change for my own health because I love myself enough. I'm just saying it's really hard for us to care enough about ourselves for the reason of I just want to live forever. Right. But when I think about it through the lens of my daughter, and her thinking, man, my dad could have been here for another 20, 30 years.
It made me cry.
I'm sorry. These are the kind of emotions that we have to conjure up if we actually want to counter the addictive nature of what society keeps putting in front of us.
Yeah. I think it's really hard. It is really hard. We have all these commercials, the food's readily available. I remember like a year ago, and I stopped in at Burger King because we were busy, whatever, and I noticed that they had veggie burgers available on the menu. And I think I texted you, or I texted Brad or somebody, because I got really excited and was like, it's working. As people, as we as the market demand things, the market will change. They will make what we demand. And that's one of the things that we were chatting about early before we launched this, was that our generation, younger generations, and everyone, at this point in our life, we have access to information at speeds and at accuracy levels that we've never had before. What he was talking about, Google Earth, we can see what's happening to the planet. It's not, a conspiracy theory, and I don't believe it. We can actually
it's objective.
See it now. Yeah, we can see it now. We have gotten lenses into the farms. We know now. And there's mixed messages coming in, but we know now what is good and what is bad. Processed food is bad. That's a fact. I think by now everybody should know. It's in a box. It's bad for you. But we know this stuff, and I think that we have the ability now to take this information and actually put it into action, and it can change the marketplace. I was talking about, I think I posted a recipe. A lot of people are asking about what you eat day to day and recipes. So I think maybe afterwards we can post some links, or we'll get some more information about where you can get recipes and learn how to make this food. But I was talking about quinoa. Everywhere you go now, you find quinoa because it's a high protein seed, right? And it's become very popular because people are demanding healthier options at restaurants. And so as we're getting this information, when you watch movies like this, when you hear people speak like this, when you see things that are happening, it's not just about knowing. I remember knowledge is power. Do you remember that song? Applied knowledge is power. It doesn't matter if you watch this movie. It doesn't matter if you got on this live stream. It doesn't matter. It matters what you do tomorrow. And if you go to the store and you refuse to buy lunch meat because you know that it's carcinogenic and should not be even sold to us, and you refuse to buy it, they're going to start selling other things as you buy them. So I just really want to encourage you to make those changes, even if they're slow, and do those things. And we had a very interesting question come in. So somebody asked, they said that they're interested in hunting for themselves, and local hunting. We live in Maryland. I know I saw somebody from Tennessee get on, so I know there's people coming in from all over. We're in the Maryland area. Somebody also asked about the Chesapeake Bay. If you're sourcing your own food, Ben, because we kind of talked about the farming and all this kind of things, and there's better ways to get animal products. If you're doing that sort of local hunting, is that better? Is that worse? Is that something you could explore or shouldn't?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things that I want to point out about this. First and foremost, so I'm an agriculturalist, and one of the biggest problems that any agriculturalist in the region where we are faces is an overpopulation of deer. I mean, to be fair, what we're calling an overpopulation is actually us infringing further and further on the ecosystems that they rely upon. So they're being forced to coexist with our manufactured landscape. So I think, the things that kept deer in check, the apex predators that we used to have in this region, things like bears and wolves and things like that, I don't see us bringing those back anytime soon. So I do believe that we have to play that apex predator role. And if you're going to eat meat, without a doubt, if you're comparing venison that's being, that you're getting out of this region, it is going to be better than what we're getting out of factory farms. But still, it's very important to know that you need to eat that with some restraint, meaning this is not an everyday food, because when we start looking into our environment, like for example in the neighborhood where we are now, there's deer right now going and eating through this entire community, and many people have that lawn envy mentality where they're spraying Roundup and many other pesticides right into their grass and fertilizers and things like that. And your deer are going to have been eating that. Likewise, we have a lot of corn that's being grown in this area, and a lot of that corn is genetically modified, and what that means is that they spray extraordinary amounts of Roundup every single year, and fertilizers and all kinds of agricultural byproducts that find their way into the rivers, lakes, and streams that the deer drink from. And this goes also to the question about fishing and eating out of the Chesapeake Bay. In moderation, it's not going to hurt you too badly, but the reality is that the fish that we like to eat happen to be bigger fish that eat other fish, and they end up being, and they mention this in the documentary, they accumulate the toxins that we're constantly pouring in off of our streets. When we think about the oils, antifreezes, and things like that are coming out of our cars. Every time it rains and hits the street, all of that runs off of the road and goes into the rivers, lakes, and streams. All of that ends up getting concentrated in these animals. So I think it's important to realize that eating these things in bulk can be very toxic to your system. And, that's why I advocate it. In comparison, certainly to eating from factory farms, but it's still something that has to be eaten in moderation.
Yeah. So because a lot of people are asking for resources and recipes, so I just ran over to my little cookbook corner, and this
Fire Engine? Oh.
The Fire Engine Diet. So this is one of the documentaries that I watched back in 2012. This book, you can get it. It's called The Engine 2 Diet or The Fire Engine Diet. It's by, I don't know how to say his name, Rip Esselstyn.
Yeah, Esselstyn.
This guy's a firefighter.
He's the son of actually one of the guys that was interviewed in the documentary.
Yeah, like an Olympian, yeah. Anyway, super jacked. He's a firefighter. He has great recipes that are super filling. This cookbook was, I think, $9. It's not expensive, and you can get it anywhere. You can order it online. Really great recipes, sort of manly recipes is kind of what he presented it as. But that's a really good book. And I remember something from that. He's a vegan, but he was really talking about the whole 80-20 rule and sort of what Ben's talking about. Like, you want your diet to be 20% or less animal products. It's, you're not going to die if you're drinking milk here and there, but what's happened in our society is that animal products are the main component, and people are so worried about getting protein and so just conditioned to believe that we need all these things, and you don't. And you can actually eat so much more. I'm a fat kid, and so I like to eat a lot of food. And I remember when I was, 100% plant-based, and I posted pictures of like platters. Like my dinner was like a platter of food and it was like less calories than if I had a steak or something, and it had more nutrients, and it was making me feel better. But you can eat a ton. Another book, and there's a million of these, is Vegetarian Made Simple. Okay. This is, again, I picked this up at TJ Maxx for $3.99. So these aren't, terribly expensive. And you can also Google this stuff. I get a lot of recipes on Pinterest, but there's white bean soup, there's, fake mac and cheese, sauteed garlic mushrooms, risotto. I mean, anything that you have in your mind that you like to eat, lasagna, burgers, there's like a vegetarian substitute for all of those things. And it's just a matter of learning what those foods are. It takes a little bit of time. For the hunters out there, this one's actually kind of funny, but I asked for this for Christmas one year. This is the Duck Dynasty lady. And this is a really good book because it's not actually vegetarian, but she has a lot of like backwoods recipes, as you would expect from, Duck Dynasty. And so there is a lot in here, and you can substitute again. If you find a recipe you like, you can substitute a lot of the ingredients with something that is vegetarian. But because she hunts, there's squirrel recipes in here. There's deer recipes in here. So if you're sort of in that lifestyle, this I would suggest is a good book, or find another hunting book. And the book that has helped me learn to cook the most, actually, someone gave this to me in college. It's called The Art of Simple Food, and this goes over, it's basically how to cook. It's not really about food, it's about how to cook, and so you can learn different ways to make any kind of food, whether it's animal or plant-based. But a lot of people don't know how to cook. Food's so readily available in these convenient little packages now, and if a lot of people tell me they don't know where to start because they're used to going to McDonald's, or they're used to picking up the pre-made meals, or if I don't get it in that form, I don't know how to make it. I don't know how to do beans. I still can't really make beans. And Ronald has to help me with rice. It is what it is. But those are just some helpful resources that have helped me over the years. And you can learn how to do this stuff. It's really not hard, like Ben says. It takes time. It takes reminding yourself and finding sort of what we call in TLC your why. Like, why are you going to stick to something like this? And if it's your daughter, or you've seen someone in your family die of cancer and now you know that it's caused by things that we're eating, that could be your motivation to really stick with this and lean more towards a plant-based diet if you don't go 100% vegan.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of getting close to an hour, so I think we'll probably wrap it up. But if there was any other questions, Ben and I can make sure we get those answered in the feed, and we're going to post. I took some notes of things to circle back to, of resources that we want to talk about. But do you want to tell them where they can find Forested and Can You Love information?
Yeah, so Forested is www.forested.us. I know that's weird, .us. But I wanted to just briefly talk about the genesis behind that work.
Yeah.
So it's a food forest. When you look at the forests around right where you live, nobody had to plant those. Nobody had to use irrigation, pesticides, or fertilizers in order for those forests to grow. So what we're doing is growing an agricultural system that mimics that. So one of the biggest problems that I faced in trying to have a plant-based diet is recognizing how far away many of the fruits and vegetables that I consume come from. And you might think, oh, well, that's just, maybe a carbon footprint issue and things like that. No, it's actually much more than that. It's actually based on the nutritional value inside of that fruit or vegetable. So let's take a tomato, for example. We get lots of tomatoes from California and from Mexico. And in order for those to get all the way to the East Coast where we live, they have to pick them when they are rock hard and green. So then they crate them and they ship them all the way across the country, and then right before it gets to the final place where it's going to sit on the shelf, they spray it with ethylene gas, and they call that a ripening process. But the reality is, and it's not toxic, by the way, the ethylene gas. That's a very natural substance to use. Bananas release a lot of it. That's why a lot of people put bananas in with something they're into a paper bag with something they're trying to ripen a little faster. It's releasing ethylene gas. But the problem is that the only way that a nutrient gets into that tomato is when it's attached through the umbilical to the mother plant. So if they're harvesting when it's green and rock hard so it doesn't bruise for it to take this 1,000+ mile journey to where I am, it's going to have profoundly less nutrients in it than the ones that are grown right here in your community or by a local farmer. So I have a lot of people asking me, like, should I spend the extra money at a farmer's market? Well, Yeah, the answer is yes. If you're just comparing, what you're seeing in the supermarket and it's half the price for tomatoes as it is at the farmer's market, you have to realize that the full nutrition goes along with the better taste as well. So the healthier food that you're eating, the healthier plant-based food that you're eating, the better it should taste. And I think that is something that a lot of people miss. So what we're doing is trying to create food forests that people can learn from and actually mimic and put it right there in their own communities. All of our neighborhoods, all of our communities have shared space that are currently underutilized, we're already paying thousands of dollars through an HOA or some other through taxes to take care of these spaces that people don't really use, just so your neighborhood looks aesthetically nice. Well, what if that space was being utilized to grow dozens, if not hundreds, of different kinds of fruits and vegetables? So that's what we're doing at Forested.
Awesome. I'm going to post it, but they're actually doing a food forest tour on August 17th, I think. It's from 6 to 8. I'm going to post a link for that. And so you can actually go. It's right here in Bowie. The first time I went, Ben had talked to me about it, and I wasn't ready. It was amazing. It's beautiful. They host feasts there. They have classes. Not everybody's going to become a gardener, but if that's something you're interested in and you really want to learn more about this, there's a resource right here in Bowie. And then you want to give them the link or just talk about Can You Love real quick?
Yeah, and Can You Love is basically my philanthropic arm. It's what I'm using to go around the world and try to put these kind of systems where we're growing the healthiest, most nutrient-dense food possible in places where people can't afford to buy healthy food. So that's both here domestically and abroad. And that's www.canyalove.org. That's CANYALOVE.org. You can email me. My email is canyalove, CANYALOVE @gmail.com. And please ask me any questions if you want to talk over the phone, Skype, whatever. I'm a busy man, single dad, but I will definitely put you in my schedule and we can make it work. So yeah, please.
Yeah.
Any questions, ideas, thoughts, anything?
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to thank everybody from getting on. It looks like a few people dropped off, but we are going to have a recording if this is something you want to share. We appreciate everybody getting on, your interest in this topic. We're excited, that people are talking about it, and I'm always wishing you good health. And thank you, Ben, for taking time out of
Absolutely.
your busy schedule
It's my purpose.
and popping by. But we're going to let you guys go. Thanks again. If you do have more questions, just put them in the comments, and Ben or myself will address those, and we'll put some resources out later. Thank you, guys. Finish.
Yeah.
Finish him.
And
Stop streaming.
how do you do that? Oh, here it is.